welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I am at Robber's Roost, which is an antique store just off of Highway 14 in the middle of nowhere in California. Probably the closest town would be Inyokern. And anyway, I wanted to take you for a tour here because I had heard that this antique store had created their own ghost town. So I wanted to use this as a feature on history and the creation of history. So let's take a look around. And so here you can see my first video that I took just looking around the property. And the layout of this space, again, people have called it a homemade ghost town. Coming up here on the Cowboy Tower, and this is one of many spaces that you can visit within this site at Robber's Roost. And I should say a little bit about the site. And actually, on the day of my visit, the general store here and antique shop, which you see right there, was actually closed. And in a second, I'll show you an image of the more modern store just to the right of that space. And I discovered this on one of the many roadside Americana websites, and people had said that it was certainly quite curious. One, because of a statue that I discovered was no longer there, and then two, because of this homemade ghost town. I was able to locate a YouTube video with the proprietor, who is said to have moved from Oklahoma over 10 years ago and bought this location. I believe his name is Roscoe Green, and I think he is mentioned in one of the signs later, I believe in the sheriff's office or in the jail space. And in 1931, this site originally opened by a family, and they had an inn here. They had a gas station, a restaurant, a store, really a multi-use space even for the 1930s. And then when the new proprietor bought the space, he began to transform it, and I'll take you through a number of the different buildings here in just a second. But what I find to be so curious about this particular location and the particular way in which they've constructed this fictive ghost town is the degree to which it characterizes what I will talk about later as folk theming, which is an approach to theming that I believe is exemplified in a space like this, as well as three other spaces to some degree that I'll be talking about. This is the memorial site to the Armistead family, and again, they were the original proprietors of this particular space. This is an image here in the jail section, and I included it because I think it shows you a little bit of the uniqueness of the space. There's a lot that they do in terms of signage, in terms of text, very minimal text, but this is one example of a few signs that you could see. Again, you could see Roscoe Green there mentioned, and a real sense of playfulness, I would say, in terms of how they have thought about constructing the space. As I mentioned with my search on YouTube, I tried to discover as much as I could about the space. There isn't a lot that I was able to discover other than this one YouTube video. But it seems to me that what they're up to here is something that is quite playful and to some extent also very ironic. So here's a bit more of my footage. Okay, this is the beauty shop. Yeah, so this is, I have to say, beyond fascinating. I don't know how to describe this space. I'm thinking a little bit of Tio's Tacos in Riverside, and yeah, it is just so close to surreal. I can't express it. But this is kind of the setup. You have these small buildings, and they've put these just curious objects in here. Reminds me also a little bit of Dennis Seaver's house in London for some reason, just because of sense of irony, I guess I detect here, as you might see. This is so quite fascinating. So still inside the beauty shop, you can see here just, a slew of everything imaginable. And I guess this is pink and set up like a beauty shop, and it seems like what they've done is, I don't know if they sought out the material culture to match the theme of the place, or if they happen to have these things and then created the space around what they had. But yeah, I find this so curious. The other thing it reminds me of would be the two Juan Pollo restaurants in San Bernardino, California as well, just in terms of the nature of the displays and what they have arranged. So let's take a look outside a little bit more beyond the beauty shop. And before we take that look at some of the other spaces, let me say a little bit about some comparison here. So I was going through Robbers Roost, I thought of these other spaces. I thought of Juan Pollo, which you can watch some of my other videos about the interesting chicken restaurants, and specifically pictured here, their Route 66 museum, which to me felt very similar in terms of the eclecticism of the various objects that were strewn, scattered throughout the space. The other one would be Tio's Tacos, that sense of bricolage that I talked about in my video about that restaurant in Riverside, California. Massive art space, and certainly I would say, when I talk about this later, characteristic of what could be called folk art in all of its glory. The other one would be Dennis Seaver's house, and if you go to Dennis Seaver's house in the Spitalfields section of London, you would say it probably has the most extensive theming or most expensive theming in terms of the reconstruction, but there's a lot of irony, there's a lot of experimentalism also that's present there. And so I would suggest that all of these in a sense have some equivalence or some connection to some of the things I noted at Robbers Roost during my visit. And with these ideas in mind, we can take a look back here near the beginning of my visit, and this is an old building then that serves as the entrance to this created ghost town. And you can see there's this interesting cross that they fashioned here at this entrance. On the right hand side is a restroom, and then to the left and above you see this interesting painting, and as I've talked about throughout this feature, it's one sign among many of just a rather peculiar and intriguing approach to the construction of space. The sign there, the Spirit of the Old West, you can see also displayed, which signifies this emphasis on the ghost town and the Old West theming. And signs like this one, I think, suggest a bit of humor and self-awareness in terms of talking about buy something, buy anything. And one of the things I appreciated was that sense of humor that I discovered throughout the many spaces of Robbers Roost. Now here, I think, is a very interesting space, and this used to be, back in the 30s, a water pumping station that supplied water to the various buildings. As you can see today, they've repurposed it, and they created this phone booth here, and this is a first example of among many of how curious and intriguing their approach to design here is. They have these different phones from different eras that appear to be glued to the walls here, again with this text, not all of it maybe making sense in terms of a children's phone and so forth. Then you enter this cowboy tower and you see these placemats and these curios displayed, even a power strip there on the left on the wall without explanation, and then below and to the right is this old-time video camera. So one of many examples of things that do not entirely seem to make sense within the space, which for me gives the space a sense of purpose, a sense of uniqueness, even a sense of the sublime. And you might also note here just the sense of decay, which also I think adds to this sense of history that they're constructing here at this site, Robbers Roost. So after my visit to Robbers Roost, I was trying to think of how I could characterize what I saw in this space. And I immediately thought of folk art. And in using folk art, I do not want to suggest either in terms of what I'm going to call folk theming or the art that we characterize as being folk, that it's somehow unsophisticated or lacking talent. I think that's quite an elitist statement about values and high and low culture. So when I use folk art, I use it in the most respectful sense possible. And again, in folk art, you think of artists who are not trained, artists who do some things maybe that are quote unquote incorrect in terms of perspective or some of their painting or drawing or sculpture techniques, what have you. And so I think what a lot of people would say about folk art is it suggests a certain form of power and creativity, a sense of the sublime, even mana, that you wouldn't normally find if someone went through the appropriate channels and was trained as an artist. So I would then suggest that this can be latched onto the notion of theming itself. When we typically think of theming, we think of a space that is backed by, let's think of any Disney theme park, backed by millions and millions of dollars, Imagineering technologies, some of the best storytellers in the world, some of the most incredible creative and technological and conceptual tools available anywhere in the world. Indeed, Imagineers have produced books and talked about the techniques that they use. But for most people, just like it's maybe impossible to think of some forms of high culture in terms of achieving it or even understanding it, most people could not approach the techniques of Disney Imagineering in their own lives. And certainly most people don't strive to create their own ghost town as the proprietors at Robbers Roost have done. So what I'm suggesting then is folk theming is an approach to theming that takes a much different direction. And specifically, I would say it's characterized by being, in terms of its status, outsider, it's subaltern, it's subcultural. It also can be said to be outside of these formal, professional consumer orders of architecture, design, and narrative of the sorts of Disney or Universal Studios or your favorite big theme park company with its amazing designers. It displays humor, it displays irony, senses of reflexivity, self-awareness, even what we might call an ideal of the uncanny or the sublime. And I think it also shows us quite clearly ideals of remaking, of repurposing, and bricolage. And so let me show you a few more of these spaces and talk about how specifically folk theming, I believe, operates in some of these examples at Robbers Roost. And so I begin back here at the beauty shop, and as I showed you earlier, what I found to be very curious about the beauty shop was that in some sense they stuck to a traditional narrative. So you have the chair, for treatments. You also have, I guess, the you can see there in the background the wall where you could purchase items like you might buy in a beauty shop, like nail polish and so forth. And then you also have these other curios, this bird type creature, pig type creature, whatever it is. You have newspapers and magazines, and again, I guess if you went into a salon, you would see these perhaps there as part of the waiting room when customers were waiting. So there is some sense of the narrative, I think, of a beauty shop that they preserve. But then I think there are also some incredibly more idiosyncratic elements. And just behind the beauty shop, there was another room. And you can see here there's this ad for Kotex pads that's just on the chair. There are these filing cabinets. It looks like a lantern, an old computer just sitting in a corner. Maybe it could be an office. There's some writing on the wall I wasn't able to make out. Again, more old devices, an old typewriter, some other case as well. So if this is to be an office, it's quite curious, I think, as an office. There was a chair here, and there was also the American flag. I mean, there were bits and pieces of patriotism. There was also a hat here, and this may have been a reference to one of the robbers who actually was mentioned in a video that I watched by the proprietor of this inn. And there's also then this interesting image, these postcards on the wall, and even the way that the postcards are placed on the wall, the one in front of the other, very, very curious and interesting to me. This gives you a sense of the layout of the area. You also have some of the signage in the exterior parts of Robbers Roost. Okay, and then we get to what to me was a very interesting space. It's labeled quite simply house, and you can see on the bottom picket fence. So in terms of like the semiotics of naming, I found it very curious just how they approached some of the spaces, naming them with more symbolic Old West names, and in this case just very simply house, almost a pure definition of a space. And then we enter into the space and we find more and more of these curious things. So a bathroom, I thought at first that was a bathtub, and I'm not sure actually if it's an old refrigerator. Again, the items are just everywhere in Robert's Roost. This is the actual kitchen. And again, it's decked out in some ways in terms of the typical material culture that we would expect to see in a kitchen. It looks, you could say, disheveled, out of order, almost used. And this space right here reminded me very much of Dennis Seaver's house, where you have that sense of inhabitation, a sense of history, but a sense that it's also just been used. And I think it does create something remarkable for a guest who's entering this space. Again, plaques like this, Americana kind of items just appearing in places, ironically, places maybe where you wouldn't expect them to be, and I think raising more questions and for me, heightening this sense of the surrealism of this particular space in terms of its folk theming. At the end of this video, I'm specifically going to be talking about this set of images here with these oil paintings on the chair. As well, I wanted to mention to you this chair. So chairs are significant in the quote house, and I will specifically later talk about this. And this again I found to be very curious and interesting in terms of its meaning and just its visual status here in this particular space. So this is showing a little bit more here of the saloon, and I did see on the YouTube video that the saloon, it actually, if you go inside, you actually have a bar and so forth. It was closed, not unlike the gift shop, so unfortunately I didn't get to see all of the spaces of Robert's Roost during my visit in Inyokern, California. And to continue to say a little bit about this idea of folk theming, I think you'll notice with the signage and then the theming that they've created, there is the sense, like in art, someone has a particular theme or a motif that they want to follow. So the Wild West, the idea of the jail, the sheriff's office, these are very familiar to us. So you certainly see those present within the space. But here's where I think it gets curious. This is a bathtub. Maybe this is a space under construction, but for me, what was really stunning in terms of what I'm calling folk theming was the lack of a front stage and a backstage that many theorists have talked about in terms of these kinds of spaces. So the fact that this particular space, you can't figure out if it's finished or not. Other spaces, you wonder like, well, what's with the camera right there? And why is the sheriff's office sign on that bench? And is it intentional that that box is there and the camera on top of it? And what about the rest of the signage and so forth? I actually jumped when I saw the body here. It's obviously not a real body, but this is again fitting in with the jail motif. And there is a toilet here and a sink, so you could say that some of this does follow a narrative of a classic jail or sheriff's office in a Wild West movie. You had another there, part of the bank, I guess. Again, very interesting signage, degrees of humor, and also degrees of that sense of it being unfinished. The bank vault, I believe it looks to me like a refrigerator with something taped to it. So again, a really remarkable approach here in terms of what I'm calling folk theming, because it suggests a level of creativity, but it doesn't suggest necessarily the level of capital required if Disney were creating a ghost town or something like this. And I might suggest as well that that sense of the erasure of the front and the backstage, and also this sense of the unfinished nature of this particular space in terms of not knowing what's complete and what's in progress in terms of the construction, fits in, I think, very nicely not only with notions of folk theming, but also suggests something about techniques of bricolage, of remaking, of repurposing. That was a major focus in Tio's Tacos in Riverside, as I mentioned. You can see here they've created here a wishing well as well. This museum sign. I was trying to actually locate the museum, and maybe I missed it, or I just didn't see it. Yeah, I mean, it's quite curious thinking about it now. You also have, the Boot Hill Cemetery, keeping with that narrative of the Wild West, and you recall that we saw that sign about the Wild West just as we entered the ghost town. And certainly when you look at the space, you could tell that it's a work in progress, and there's this sense again of inhabitation that they've taken time over the years to create more and more. Now, the little Abner and Daisy May statue, I believe was right here, and maybe this is homage to them. It was kind of this comical statue that was apparently right in front of the property. I didn't see it, so I don't know what happened to it. I love even the jail sign here falling down. Again, is that intentional or not? But to me, it added something to this particular space. So let me close today with a brief reading of some field notes that I took during my visit to Robbers Roost. When I first noticed these paintings, I had the greatest difficulty categorizing them, or rather the space in which they exist. Like many of the spaces within the faux ghost town, these 4 paintings on this chair defied the interpreter who wished to understand them and their surrounding spaces. Why these paintings and why on this chair? Did the landscapes portend any specific meanings that could be attached to the overall narrative of Robbers Roost? Did their specific placement have meaning? Why weren't they placed on the wall, where we might expect to see such paintings? Were they chosen for this space, or were they leftovers? Detritus of a massive antique collection, the remainders of years of collecting. Did any of this suggest something beyond meaning, not unlike Dennis Seaver's house, perhaps a deep irony, reflexivity, or humor that is intended to throw the interpreter off? Just around the corner from this chair, I discover a second one, with an equally elusive set of meanings. In this case, the space of the chair is filled with a few small objects, a more miniaturized portrait of what I noted in the last chair with the 4 oils overflowing upon it. Again, we have 4 objects: a knife, fork, old doorknob, and a Support Our Troops sticker. Like the last case, I am left reeling from interpretive anxiety. At first, I recalled Tio's Tacos in Riverside and thought of the eclectic bricolage of various items that were often repurposed and reassembled into some new form. But in that case, the remaking is for the purpose of using certain types of objects and reworking them into a new, often singular feature. In this case, at Robbers Roost, we have something quite different. The 4 objects do not form a fifth form in any recognizable sense. Instead, we are drawn to the meaning of the lack of meaning that results from the combination of fork, knife, doorknob, and Support Our Troops sticker. The only thing close to an explanation is Duchamp's ready-made, if we can speak of it here. And, as I asked before, why these and why on this chair? Could it be that some random event led to their placement here? And if this is the case, can we say that this makes the meaning of these spaces and Robbers Roost all the more sublime? Could we say that folk theming, if there is such a thing, is like folk art in that it tears down all of our expectations of what art or theming should be? What is left of theming in this rubble? Hope you enjoyed this video feature today here at Robbers Roost and their recreated ghost town. Please come back for additional video features for the Immersive Worlds Handbook.